Good morning. My name is Claire Harrison. I'm the Managing Director of Harrison's. We're a HR consulting company based in Brisbane, for those that don't know. Today, we are talking the always hot topic of managing a disciplinary process and how we avoid the pitfalls that go along with that. So as an intro to this topic, we probably all understand the many ramifications of getting a disciplinary process wrong in the form of an unfair dismissal claim, adverse action, general protections claims, workers' comp claims, etc. So it can be very costly and time-consuming if we get this process wrong. So we have a 7-step disciplinary process that I'm going to focus on today and walk you through that. But we will start off by trying to be a little bit proactive. But before we do that, we are not lawyers, we're not employment lawyers, nor am I giving you any specific advice relevant to any specific organisation issue that you currently have. A little bit about Harrison's. For those that don't know, we have 4 main service areas. So consulting, which is really about filling capacity or capability for an organisation that has an existing HR team or not. That can be anything from employment contracts, policies, performance review systems, through to training, leadership development, leadership coaching, workplace investigations. That's our consulting service. HR team service we describe as being outsourced, insourced HR. So it's very suited to a business from about 30 to 300 employees where they've decided that they will engage or outsource HR rather than recruiting their own HR team. That starts with a HR health check. We develop a HR plan. We always do an engagement survey. And then based on that plan, we allocate a HR manager to deliver on that plan over a period of time. Third service is recruitment and onboarding with a focus on professional and executive positions. My HR Experts is really set up for micro, small businesses, but also for HR people that want access to tools and templates. It has a range of templates around policies, employment contracts, longer webinars on a range of topics, video explainers, a whole raft of information and tools and templates, and that's on a monthly subscription fee. So that's a little bit about Harrison's for those that didn't already know. So I'm going to talk a little bit proactively because ideally we would like to be in a position where we're not having to manage disciplinary issues. So that is best done by being proactive. So performance in best places to work. They have a focus on business deliverables. So when we are setting KPIs or targets, performance outcomes, writing position descriptions, we're thinking about why that position is important for the business. What do they need to deliver to achieve the business goals? And I suppose a precursor there is you need a business plan or a strategic plan, whatever it is in your organisation. We should expect high performance for our people, but we need to be clear about what that looks like. And we need to build a culture of feedback in the moment. So constructive, regular feedback. So not waiting for an annual performance review or a monthly meeting. It needs to be straight after the meeting in a constructive way or straight after the project. And I say that as, both positively and negatively, but let's not hold off on feedback. So in terms of when we look at managing performance, so there's a whole lot of areas that we look at and we consider. So the goals, so we set the goals. Ideally, you're doing, performance reviews, not annually, but monthly or quarterly at least. Behaviours that need to be in place that support your values and culture for the organisation, so the how we do it. And then a performance review, we talk about career, if they'd like to have that discussion, and what the capability gap is. So underlying that is that regular coaching, feedback and assessment. So to avoid the disciplinary issues and the ugly side of that is, as much as possible, we want to proactively be putting a system in place to manage performance. I've talked a bit about this. So again, putting in your structure and your system, regular check-ins, formal and informal, in the moment feedback, no surprises, and making sure you've got probation period reviews, because I think most of you online are probably in HR, so we're all very used to the manager who calls us and says, I need to get rid of this person. And we say, okay, so where are they at in their probation period? Oh, their probation period finished yesterday. What documentation do you have? We didn't do any meetings. So, if we manage probation period, at least, those first 90 days is so important, making sure you've got a system in place to do that. Okay, so moving on to the underperformance and misconduct areas. So reasons for underperformance, I'm sure you all experience these, so it's nothing new. I won't go through them, but there can be a raft of reasons, both culturally, lack of systems, wrong person in the job, no training, whatever that may look like in terms of the reasons for underperformance. So we need to think about that when we're going into a disciplinary poor performance issue, because as an organisation, we have to think about how have we failed to support this person in doing their job before we start down a disciplinary path. Okay, so let's get into the performance and conduct problems and how we manage them. I just wanted to talk a little bit about, there's two areas, I suppose, that we look at when we're looking at disciplinary matters. One is performance. So performance in terms of not doing their job. So as an example, I have a salesperson, the easy example, I have a salesperson that has monthly targets to deliver on new business, let's just say, and they're missing that. That's a performance issue. Versus a conduct issue tends to be more behaviour related. So bullying, sexual harassment, theft, fraud, assault, all of those types of behaviours, which may be at a minor level, like a smaller level, but worst case scenario is that they may warrant dismissal. So be careful about the misconduct issues, and I'll just maybe cover it in this slide. But in terms of, this is the process, but I think just in terms of misconduct issues, when we talk about investigate, so investigate for a performance issue, let's just use the sales guy as an example, will be gathering all of his sales data. So hopefully, you might have a CRM that tracks how many visits they did, how many proposals or quotes they did, what the conversion is, what's the activity, and therefore what the result has been, because we want to understand that whole process. Yes, he's missed, or she has missed her targets, but why was that? There might have been another reason. So we just want to make sure we've got all of the evidence before we go into any of those meetings. But when we look at a conduct issue, is where we need to decide and really triage is what is the most appropriate path forward when we have a conduct issue. So as an example, if you have someone alleging bullying or sexual harassment, normally that will warrant an investigation and that formal process, which we've covered in a previous one of the HR Byte sessions, so that's available for you to look at. But there's an investigation that needs to happen before the disciplinary process. So I think that's really important, because sometimes what I see is the workplace investigation becomes part of the disciplinary process, but really we don't do a disciplinary meeting until after we've done the workplace investigation when it comes to a conduct type issue. So moving on from that, these are the 7 steps from a disciplinary process perspective. So first of all, the evidence, I'm going to talk through each of these, give notice, the allegations, get a response, consider the response, decide on the outcome, and then monitor how it's going. So to talk through each of these, investigate, like I said, gathering the evidence, that might be reports, that might be the employment contract, that might be your policies, whatever else. And so, if someone's regularly turning up late or they're missing their deadlines, just make sure you've got the data to support that. We don't want to go into a meeting with generalities in terms of, you always miss your targets. We want to be really specific, because that's fair to the person that's receiving the feedback, as well as they need to know. And the only way that we improve performance is by specifically knowing what it is that we've done wrong. So we need that information. So gathering the evidence, being objective, you need to make sure that you're in a position to be able to be objective. If you feel as though you're not impartial, then you need to pull away. And, if it's too emotive for you, again, you're not the right person to be managing this process. So importantly is to be focusing on the behaviour and the conduct of what's not working, and not the individual. It's not a targeted personal attack. It's about the behaviour and conduct. So be really objective and focused on what that is. And be really consistent, because I think the important thing is also to think about, if you're raising a disciplinary matter with one person, would you do this with someone else? So we need to be really consistent in what we're accepting from one person versus versus another. So as an example, if you're going to pull someone up in a disciplinary meeting for swearing too frequently, but you have a workplace that everyone swears frequently, then that's not fair. So notice. So you do need to give notice of the meeting, and importantly, you need to tell them what it's about. So you don't need to give them the allegations. And look, and this is different depending on the severity as well. So in serious cases, definitely give notice in writing. That can be an email or a letter. So in the case, for example, if you definitely think it may result in termination, then I would definitely be issuing it in writing and covering off all of the requirements about what goes into writing, into the requirement for notice. So one of those things is a support person. So in terms of what the Act says that you can't unreasonably refuse the request for a support person. But the majority of our clients, we will always pretty much put it in a notice of meeting that they can bring a support person. You don't have to do that, but you need to know that if they ask for a support person, that you need to do that. And always when you do your meeting, which is jumping ahead, but just make a note of a support person was offered, or if the support person's in attendance, just make sure you keep notes of that. So important, document each step of the process. In terms of suspension, so suspension should only happen if there's a risk, a serious risk to the organisation, and normally that's often around safety, but it could be an organisational risk that may exist in terms of, if it's a fraud case, for example, and you're investigating that, then that you could stand someone down with pay. So just be careful about that, and also being careful about suspending or sending someone home to work when they're the one that's making the complaint, because we don't want to negatively be impacting them. So suspension, I would definitely always recommend if it's been a safety issue. So, or, if it's a significant bullying issue, for example, because it's about, we've got that overlapping legislation now with, I suppose, the disciplinary matters, is we're looking at the Fair Work Act requirement and the Commission and what they've heard, but we definitely have that overlap now with the psychosafety requirements that sit under the Work Health and Safety Act. So it's really important through a disciplinary process or an investigation that no matter what's been the allegations is that we're providing support throughout the processes. So, the best way to do that for organisations is definitely by providing an employee assistance program. And I would always put that in our documentation, even for a notice of meeting or a warning letter, whatever it might be. But also thinking about support person is if they want to delay the meeting to have their support person there, then you can reasonably do that. But, if it goes on for an extended period of time, then we just call the meeting and we need to let them know that you need to attend this meeting at this time. If your support person is not available, for example, we had one recently that was saying they couldn't get their lawyer there for 2 or 3 weeks. That's unreasonable. We're going to go ahead with a disciplinary meeting before that. So giving notice, effective performance conversation. So just thinking about how you go into the meeting. So being prepared, allocate the right amount of time, ensure the room has no distractions and is private, ensure you're in the right frame of mind, especially this is when it's the manager of the person. Like I say, if you're feeling too emotive or defensive, you're not the right person to be doing this. And again, keeping to the facts, just everything that you're talking about needs to be backed up by evidence and facts, and specifics as much as possible: time, place, date, who was involved. So then the allegations. So again, these can be more detailed or specific depending on the severity. So if we've got our salesperson, for example, we're calling them in and we're going to go through the last few months of when they haven't hit or whatever they've done around their sales performance, and put all that detail forward to them, and be prepared for them saying, market conditions have worsened and it's not my fault that sales aren't being hit, which potentially is valid. But then what we also want to be looking at in that conversation is, okay, but what about the sales activity that person has done? What are other salespeople achieving? So just make sure you've got all your information ready before you go into that meeting, as much as possible, just thinking about where the conversation could go and being prepared for that. And then, like I say, being really specific in terms of the allegations you're talking about. So in terms of, just to cover off on, allegations in writing beforehand, it's not a, generally, I'll say, because nothing's black and white, generally, it's not a requirement to put it in writing. However, if you're doing one of the serious misconduct issues that I was talking about before, then I would put that in writing. Saying that, if it's a physical altercation, so someone's punched someone on the factory floor, then really that is okay, you come into the office, we're having a meeting at whatever time, and really it's about look at the CCTV footage, whoever witnessed you punching this person that was not, it wasn't asked for. What have you got to say to that? So really the notice is, okay, at 2:00 today, I want you to come to a meeting to talk about you punching Bob at 9:00 this morning. That's it. But if we're talking about something that's, performance, for example, then I would be putting some generalities in a letter beforehand to prep the person for that. So that's a bit grey in terms of what I've said. But I think most importantly, at the meeting, be very clear on what your allegations are and the evidence and being specific. Response. So importantly, at the meeting, we're going to put forward our concerns, the allegations. We'll go through them one at a time if there's more than one. And each time we'll put forward our allegation, and then we need to give them an opportunity to respond to each of those allegations. We need to listen. We need to respond. We don't need to argue. We don't need to question. We just get the response. If we need to ask clarifying questions, we can do that, but we're giving them a valid opportunity to respond to the allegations and give their side of the story. So documenting that. And then we need to consider that. So no matter what they've said, even if we think we're going to sack them now, is that we need to show genuine consideration. And normally that means ending the meeting and coming back at a later point with the outcome of that meeting. It never, ever, ever means I walk into a disciplinary meeting with my written warning or termination letter ready to go, because that completely negates the whole process. So then we deliver the outcome, which may be nothing, because we've decided, that's what they've said is valid and it doesn't warrant any further action. It could include training, it could include performance plans, it could include written warnings, it could include demotion, and it could include dismissal. But just be careful about all of those final options to make sure that everything has stacked up and you've got the grounds on which to do that, because, we know for unfair dismissal, they will look at substantive fairness and procedural fairness, and often it's the procedural fairness part that gets you into trouble. But substantive fairness is the reason for the termination. So we need both those things. We need a valid, good reason for it to warrant dismissal, but we also need to show a procedural fairness. So then we document that and we provide that to them. Just so we're clear though, a written warning or a dismissal letter does not need to be signed by the employee. It's a one-way document, you providing an outcome. Nor I don't normally provide my notes to any of those meetings to the employee, but I'm very clear with them from the outset that I'm going to take my own notes. You should take your own notes, because I'm not going to provide you with my notes. So nor do we do this, it's very unnecessary to give your notes and ask them to review your notes to ensure there was an accurate reflection. Unnecessary. That there's processes like when you're doing statements more formally that you might require that, but not in this process. So then if they're still employed, we monitor, and we make sure we monitor. If we've issued a written warning that says we're going to review this in a month, we set that meeting and we make sure we have that meeting, really importantly. Supporting documentation that you should have in place for your organisation is a performance and misconduct policy. But what I would say about that is it needs to be general enough to allow for different options. What we don't want is that we go through a first, second, third warning in this organisation, because each situation is different, and in many cases you won't need to go through first, second, third. Definitely a process around probation review, your performance management disciplinary checklist for both HR people and managers to work through when you're going through this process, templates around notices of meetings, records of meetings, warning letters and termination letters. So what we've covered is the 7 steps of the disciplinary matter, appreciating when to use a disciplinary process and not, understand how to structure that disciplinary meeting, discover how to assess what action penalties are appropriate to impose post the disciplinary meeting, how to draft a written warning and termination letter. So very important, I should have mentioned in those letters that you need to say in a written warning letter is that future behaviour conduct that's unacceptable may result in further disciplinary action, including another warning or termination. It's really important that that is in your warning letters, because if you don't have that, that I have seen definitely gets people unstuck when they go to commission, because it won't stand up as a written warning. It wasn't clear that if they continue to do that, they could be dismissed. So really important to get your wording right. Become aware of the legislation to be considered, which we've talked about. As well as that, you need to consider what's in your employment contracts and your own policies. And the penalties we discussed at the beginning. So in terms of how Harrison's can help you, we have a relaunch of our My HR Experts product. So it's relaunching at $99 only per month. It's in beta version, but you can join now. And that is full of tools and templates around this process. This recording goes up there. And there's a raft of other webinars, video explainers, tools, templates, like I say. Train your managers. We can definitely deliver training for them that's more comprehensive than this. We do conduct workplace investigations and mediations, and you can buy a copy of my book if you like, which is done online. So that is the end of our HR Bites, which is all about the disciplinary process and how to avoid the pitfalls. If you'd like to get in contact with us, you can do that through LinkedIn is probably a good way to do that, or you can email info@hhr.com.au. So I'm Claire Harrison, and thank you very much for your time today.